Hi there, we're absolutely delighted to have you with us today, Abi. I'd just like to welcome Abi Freeman, co founder of Brink. Brink works with purpose driven organizations to help them tackle big challenges with clarity and courage. And Brink is an innovation practice made of psychologists, strategists, designers, creative thinkers, and tech optimists. And I've known you for a little while now, Abi, and I've really followed your work with intrigue. You are an organizational psychologist at heart. And can you tell us a little bit about your work with purpose driven organizations? What excites you right now?
Thanks so much for the intro, and thanks for having me this evening. At Brink, we work with anyone that's looking to make a positive dent on the world. So we work with from startups right through to governments. And the thing that really gets me out of bed is the people. You know, as a psychologist, it's really for me all about what we're doing as humans and human endeavor. And the work of innovation and entrepreneurship is hard.
Yeah.
And so, it's really supporting people doing that hard work that really excites me. I think there's a few other things in the mix as well. I think we're seeing a big shift of business models, marrying profit with purpose, that I
Yeah.
think is really cool. At Brink, we're a B Corp.
Yeah.
We're right at the end of B Corp month, but I think those new models coming through are super interesting as well. And then I think just an awareness of how we measure what matters, moving beyond vanity metrics and clicks to like actually what does impact mean,
Mm.
moving beyond just doing no harm to benefit. I think the sort of purpose startups are doing some really cool things in that space too.
Awesome. And as you will be aware, as a founder yourself, spinning all the plates, trying to get your startup off the ground, build momentum, change the world, and develop a healthy culture where people want to come to work. And that is so hard, particularly when you're really short on resources and time. And culture doesn't really cost money, but when it goes wrong, it can get extremely draining for everybody involved for all of the reasons mentioned above. What can you suggest from your vast experience of how founders can establish a healthy culture from the get go?
It's such a great question, and I think it's one that's so often sort of ignored or neglected or sort of thought about after the event. But culture from the outset is something that's really in the DNA of a team owner businesses at scale. So that's something that really interests me is even when you're just one person or, co-founders or a tiny team, the sort of rituals and the habits, the behaviors that you set up then are going to be present as you scale. And so it's such a great question because I think if it is something that you're thinking about in and amongst all your other metrics, then that's really going to set you up for success. And I think, to your question, there's a lot, right? I could talk about this for days, but if I had to pick a couple, I would say, first of all, thinking about ways of being as much as ways of doing things. It's so easy with culture to think about what do we do, what meetings do we have, but actually culture is a way of being and a way of being on repeat. So
Mm.
look as a team at how you're being with each other. Are you truly listening? Are you sort of building on each other's ideas and having low ego about whose idea it is? Are you sharing early and often? We all know in entrepreneurship and startup land that it's not the idea, it's the execution actually. So share those ideas super early, get them out in front of your team and in front of humans and test. And that ability to really learn from what you're putting out into the world and from each other. Those sort of mindsets, we call them at Brink, are really important. And then there's a couple of other things. If you're at the stage where you're starting to grow your team, people come to us and interview and sort of look for cultural fit, and I really challenge that. For me, it's what are you going to contribute? Like, come and contribute to our culture. Don't just fit in. And cultural contribution, even from the early days, as co-founders, your first hire is really going to set the tone for that. And we were so fortunate with our first hire. He challenged us about a lot of the things that we were holding sacred in our culture. And I think welcoming that and making space for each person to bring their own thing is how you're going to welcome diversity, how you're going to have really sort of team that goes beyond inclusion to just being a real melting pot. And then the last thing I'd say, it's quite a buzzword, right? But psychological safety is a thing.
Mhm.
And in culture, it's really sort of when it's not saying you need to have a harmonious culture all the time, especially
Yeah.
in startups and in this kind of work. You want to be able to challenge. You're going to be challenging the status quo with your work because that's the nature of the kind of businesses that you're working with, the kind of people in the room. It's you know, it's in our nature in this part of impact work, right? So psychological safety isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about moving together healthily through conflict. It's
Yeah.
about moving together healthily through failure. Like, you're going to mess up, you're going to
Mm.
break, so you're going to break stuff, you're going to get things wrong. As a team and also out in the world, you just are. It's not avoiding mistakes, it's not avoiding conflict, it's moving together as a team safely through them and supporting each other through them and beyond. So I think if you're doing those things, or at least thinking about them, then you're already on the front foot.
Cool. And you've kind of answered my question, which was how can you develop practices where people know they can mess up, learn from it, and grow? Is there
Yeah, I
anything
mean,
else you want to add there?
yeah, I really think that having a language for it is important. I think all the sort of findings coming out of Amy Edmondson and through Google about psychological safety has given us a name for that.
Yeah.
But for example, at Brink, we have names for stuff. So, like, sweaty conversations. If you've got to have a bit of conflict with your teammate and say, actually, this isn't working, or you messed up, we call that a sweaty conversation. Just giving it a name sort of diffuses a lot of the stress around it already. And those become kind of memes in the culture. So I think naming things, naming them well, and really just going there is something. And then the only other thing I think I've touched on, but I really want to emphasize, is how these things will take sort of what I would call grooving. You're not going
Yeah.
to get there from the outset. And
Yeah.
especially if you didn't know each other as a team before, maybe you were friends before, but if you weren't, you're going to take time to get into a groove. And that grooving comes only through sort of repetition, rituals, all of those things that you can design together as a team. And I'm sure there'll be someone on the team that loves that. Others may not be interested, but
Yeah.
whoever's up for designing that sort of ritual and rhythm, that stuff is super important.
Yeah, totally. And the thing that I'm really excited to talk to you about is most recently you uncovered a practice that's helped to develop the culture within your organization throughout lockdown, which is actually built upon the 36 questions to fall in love. And then it's a ... with your team. And I've heard about these questions in a romantic setting. So I'm really interested to understand how that unfolded, what happened, what surprised you, and maybe what you can pass on to us.
Yeah, thank you for getting in touch about that. I've really enjoyed sort of trying things out with my co-founder Lee on the team, and this was one where we were like, let's try it, and it's gone really well for us. So as you mentioned, at the start of lockdown, it was a stressful time, wasn't it? We were all in distress. We went from being an in-person business in our studio in Shoreditch to being sort of suddenly remote, having to figure out what that meant, sort of get acquainted with all the tools, as so many of us did. And we realised that not being able to see each other around the room meant it was really hard to know what other people were working on. And as we were scaling quite quickly, people really had a thirst for knowing about how everyone else was doing in their work. So we started a Monday morning meeting that was very kind of programmatic, like almost like an extended stand-up, with talking about the work. But we soon realised that wasn't really hitting the mark, and people just wanted to, when we asked at the start of the meeting, how are you? People really wanted to answer that, and the answer was typically not fine. Particularly in British culture, how are you is often met with a I'm fine, and that's not the case. And we really learned, like, people were struggling. When you're fully remote, it's hard to see who's sort of stuck in a fight, flight, or there's actually a third thing, freeze mode. It was the freeze mode that worried me the most. And that's why we wanted to design a thing that would really show us actually how is the team doing, not so much what are they working on actually, but how are they. So we started with that sort of Monday morning ritual.
And can you maybe just tell us, maybe explain to people who don't understand the concept of the 36 questions, first of all, because I think that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, sure. So that's something that we sort of added in as a second question after genuinely, how are you doing really? The 36 questions is from a psychologist called Arthur Aarons, who, as you say, is a relationships guy. He's not a teams guy. And he realized that you could accelerate falling in love by answering as a pair these 36 questions that start off quite simply about your background and get more and more intimate as they go. And they end up being incredibly intimate, but also questions about each other. And so, through answering those progressively more intimate questions, you get to learn about each other on such a deep level that breeds a lot of trust, a lot of understanding, and it's about getting to know each other, which breeds intimacy. That version ends with staring each other in the eye in silence for 4 minutes. That's not something that we've done as a team. I think that is purely for the romantic version. But what we realise, as a psychologist myself, my co-founder Lee, also in a team that is very sort of curious about the sort of human aspect of these things, we thought, what is it about that building intimacy, trust that we need to do our jobs well? We're a highly collaborative company. We're working in big consortia with government, startups, universities, all sorts, to do very hard stuff to do with the pandemic or to do with testing technology in the real world. And so we need to build that trust very quickly. And so asking those questions of each other every Monday morning, we pick a different question from the list and we ask it. And it's sort of, sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's really poignant, and some people cry, and there's a bit of that sort of emotion that doesn't happen in a sort of stand-up update. But generally, you get to learn something new about your teammates that you never knew before. And it's that just sort of shared experience first, but also that kind of intimacy that really builds the trust.
Yeah. And I think the opportunity to call people to vulnerability is something that people shirk from, right?
Yeah.
And that feeds into what you're talking about. If you have developed psychological safety in the first place and you're building that trust, then hopefully over time it becomes a team that knows that people can support them.
That's it. And through the last couple of years, there have been some really tough personal things happening that people have felt safe to bring to that Monday morning space. It's not a space where it's sort of make everyone feel better. You can hold each other in whatever emotion's coming up. And that ability to just hold a space is something that I think online is hard to do.
Yeah.
And in new teams is hard to do because you just want to be in sort of production ship mode. But actually holding space to sort of really just be together instead of do together is really important.
Yeah, I love that idea of holding space to be, because we're so programmed just to do.
Yeah.
And when we forget to be, then everything else really gets lost, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And doing is my natural state. So I have to remind myself to just be as well. But it's a pleasure, and now our team love coming to Monday mornings. We get that feedback regularly. Like, I've never had a job where I felt that enthusiastic about coming to work on a Monday before. And hopefully it's the content of the work as well. But for sure, that moment of just being together and learning about each other and enjoying and being able to share, if you're not okay, what support you're going to need for that week is really quite special.
I'm going to introduce that to our Monday morning meetings. Awesome. Gentlemen, they're going to love it.
Let me know how it goes. I can't wait to hear.
I will. And my last question is really, what's keeping you sane right now?
Oof, yes, such a good question. My puppy, we've got a lockdown dog that's definitely getting me up and out for a walk in the morning. That's really been great. And also hope. I feel like despite everything, I just love on Twitter and Instagram reading about sort of new businesses doing cool stuff, the work that you're doing as well, that sort of new ideas getting out into the world gives me a huge amount of hope, and that's keeping me sane.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been an absolute joy to chat with you, and look forward to doing that again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
You're welcome.